Welcome, and thank you for joining us for the first ever debate finals for AP Language and Writing. My name is Dr. Anderson, and I have the great pleasure of teaching the Hermiston High School AP Language and Writing students. This past summer, our rising juniors that sought admittance into that class worked all summer on crafting 8 speeches, because ultimately they would be doing the debate you will see tonight. All of us AP students in the course are listed on the back page of your program, but at this time, I would like all of you, the 2015-2016 HHS Advanced Placement Language and Writing students, to please stand so we can acknowledge you. Tonight, you're going to get to watch the top 8 debaters from our class of 33. Tonight, the topic will be resolved. The United States government should substantially curtail its domestic surveillance program. Now, tonight, the pro side of the debate, who's located over here, is going to try to convince you to support this resolution. The con side of the debate, located over here, will try to convince you that you should not support this resolution. It is important to note, however, that the debaters did most of their research this summer and early parts of the fall. So I have to tell you that changes after October 25th of 2015 are not going to be addressed. So do not expect tonight to hear about the terrorist attacks in Paris. Don't expect to hear tonight about the NSA's change in some of their policies, okay? It just wasn't fair to them to have to sort of move all of their arguments because of the latest changes, okay? So you as audience members have the chance to vote on the people you think are top in this debate. Please know we will have this debate and then a debate after it. So this is debate 1 if you're looking at your ballots. And we listed the people that would be speaking on there. We have pro side here, con side here. Ultimately, however, the people who will decide who wins this round are actually going to be 4 great members of our community who so kindly agreed to judge. If I could have the judges please stand to be acknowledged. We are very fortunate to have Mrs. Karen Sherman, a member of a longtime teacher in the Hermiston School District, who's now retired and serves as the president of the Hermiston School Board. She also is on the Hermiston Educational Foundation, so we're very happy to have her. We also have Ms. Nicole Kane, who is the HHS Debate and Speech Coach. She was very kind to give her services to us tonight. We also have Mr. Jake Bacon, the assistant principal for HHS, who's kind enough to show up, and also Mr. George Anderson of Anderson and Hansel, an attorney here in the community, who's also here. At this time, I want to remind you, at the very end of this debate and the next one, we will have cookies and Starbucks coffee in the Commons area, and I just want to let you know that that was thanks to the sponsorship of Anderson and Hansel. So thank you very much for that. Finally, I would just like to tell you that at the end of the first debate, we have 4 different students who will collect the ballots that you filled out. So if you audience members will pass your ballots to the edge of your seats, they'll collect those. It would be wonderful to get constructive criticism from you for these students to look at later. So at this time, I'd like to introduce the debate teams for our first debate. On the pro side of the debate, if you would stand please, we have Matthew Rada and Frederick Gonzalez. And then for the con, we have Taylor Cruz and Caitlin Johnson. Spent a lot of time preparing for these debates. Could we all please double check our cell phones and make sure they're off? Give you a little time for that. Okay, with that, thanks again for coming. Let's debate.
As President Lincoln stated in a speech in Kalamazoo, Michigan, quote, "Don't interfere with anything in the Constitution. That must be maintained, for it is the only safeguard of our liberties. And not to Democrats alone who make this appeal, but to all who love these great and true principles." End quote. Our Constitution, the government that runs this country and protects our rights as American citizens, is slowly being torn apart by our own.
You have to stop and turn up the mic. Turn it on the side. So sorry.
Where? Okay. Hello? 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 Test. Wow. Test.
Okay.
Test.
Can you hear him at best?
Test.
Raise your hand if you can.
Hello.
Great. Sorry about that. So Matt, I'm terribly sorry. We'll have you start again.
Right. As President Lincoln stated in a speech in Kalamazoo, Michigan, quote, "Don't interfere with anything in the Constitution. That must be maintained, for it is the only safeguard of our liberties. And not to Democrats alone do I make this appeal, but to all who love these great and true principles." End quote. Our Constitution, the document that runs this country and protects our rights as American citizens, is slowly being torn apart by our own government. The Fourth Amendment in particular has taken several hits. It is of utmost importance that the United States federal government substantially curtails domestic surveillance, as one, it is an example of how the government is slowly removing the rights and protections given to the American people. Two, it strikes fear and or paranoia in the public. And three, all boundaries for obtaining data in the NSA need to be reestablished. We need to take action now before it's too late and we completely lose this nation. As the Libertarian magazine Reason states, the Fourth Amendment is being slowly removed or eroded. The government has effectively, quote, "worked around the Fourth Amendment," quote, end quote. As the Supreme Court allowed for the gathering of information about website visits, phone calls, location, and making data, the government has limited how many situations the Fourth Amendment protects. A fantastic example given by award-winning magazine Reason is how the U.S. border is basically constitution-free. The big problem with this is that according to the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, the United States, the border of the United States, quote, "consists of all land and sea boundaries," end quote, and stretches 100 miles out in either direction, putting most of the U.S. and its population in this area. According to the government, nothing that occurs in public is actually a search. This wasn't a huge issue in the past, but with the creation of the GPS and security cameras and new technologies of that sort, public searches have become much more elaborate, with the excuse being that nothing in public is actually a search. Think of domestic surveillance in this sense as an old creepy man following you, taking notes about what you say and do. We live in a technological era. Most communication occurs online. Spying online and social media conversations is just like an old creepy man following you, taking notes. Stalking is considered a federal offense in the physical world. So I ask you, what's the difference on the online and digital world? According to the public through surveys and interviews, such as that posted on the Financial Times website, people don't want to sacrifice their own online privacy to protect against terrorism, and in general, people are beginning to get paranoid over what's being spied on. As the new American states, right next to an article on Financial Times that was for the continuation of domestic surveillance, was a poll. This poll asked, quote, "Should online privacy be sacrificed to combat terrorism?" End quote. The overwhelming answer, winning 2-1, was no. Our online privacy should not be sacrificed. As domestic wiretapping rights, quote, "Some people felt that the constitutional rights of Americans were no longer being sufficiently protected," end quote. As Matt Welch for Reason explains, quote, "The rude fact is that the executive branch is conducting all this constitutional surveillance while constantly lying about it," end quote. More and more people are getting paranoid of the domestic surveillance in this country, and Welch's words follow: be paranoid. All boundaries for obtaining data need to be reestablished. As Bruce Snyder said, quote, "Domestic surveillance is failing to protect us, along with the continuous lies about its capabilities," end quote. How can something with little to no restrictions and no reason for support be supported? The NSA needs to be more transparent in their dealings. Hillary Clinton stated, quote, "I think the NSA needs to be more transparent about what it's doing, sharing with the American people, which it hasn't," end quote. How can the NSA accomplish this, you might ask? By informing all citizens in the actions taken, so they say, to protect the country. We need to take action now and substantially curtail the domestic surveillance before it's too late and we completely lose this nation. Hello?
All right. Instead of focusing on how bad our domestic surveillance is, have you ever thought about what might happen if it were to cease? That actually could prove to be the downfall of our country in many ways. So we ask, will the substantial curtailing of the U.S.'s domestic surveillance really be beneficial to our country? The U.S. monitors specific people in order to preserve the public peace, and most importantly, prevent terrorist attacks in our nation. Without the use of our country's metadata program, what is there to say for our current protection? Proponents of the resolution tend to generalize the NSA as massively unconstitutional. In reality, the organization is constantly aware of how people will react to the way they surveil, and ensures that only people suspected of terrorism are monitored. To give one example, according to author Megan Neal, in a report by the New American Foundation, quote, after investigating the 227 Al-Qaeda-affiliated people or groups that have been charged for committing acts of terrorism in the U.S. since 9/11, just one conviction came out of the government's extra-controversial practice of spying on its own citizens, end quote. This instance was in the charge against a cab driver in San Diego who gave money to a terrorist group in Somalia. Not all Americans are spied upon, and the minority that are have a reasonable suspicion to terrorist attacks. Furthermore, the NSA in particular has claimed to prevent over 50 domestic terrorist activities since the activities of 9/11. Most check at the word claim, to which they say that Chief General Keith Alexander of the NSA had overly exaggerated the number of prevented terrorist attacks. The fact that bulk metadata still stops terrorist attacks remains true. One instance, according to FBI Deputy Director Sean Joyce, when, quote, the NSA officials discovered a scheme while monitoring a known extremist in Yemen who was in contact with an individual in the U.S. After initiating surveillance, they were able to detect nascent plotting to bomb the stock exchange and ultimately disrupt the plot, end quote. This serves as a prime example of how domestic surveillance is helping us rather than harming us. Curtailing domestic surveillance could hurt us substantially. Overseas, ISIS, an extremist organization who is generally known for its terrorist activity, has been gaining prominent standing in the Middle East. This is creating a substantial problem when you add that ISIS is connecting their recruits with social media. Through social media, terrorist groups have access to anyone in the world and will not think twice about using it to their advantage. Robert Hannigan, in his op-ed article, accused technology companies of, quote, being in denial over the way the internet is being misused by terrorists, end quote. They are speaking and connecting with their peers in their own means. We are enabling ISIS and other terrorist groups every day we ignore this issue. If we curtail domestic surveillance, we are giving our terrorists what they desire, and therefore are crippling our own national security. It is pertinent that we, as citizens of the U.S., ensure that our nation is protected, that it is a democracy, albeit a representative democracy. Substantially curtailing our domestic surveillance would prove to yield more harm rather than benefit. To reiterate, our country needs its current level of intelligence gathering in order to monitor online data, such as social media, and to prevent terrorist plots against the U.S., and to ensure that our civil liberties are not violated nor the Constitution.
Hello? If you'd like to reserve 1 minute, Rossberg Corporation. Yes. Yes.
This one off.
If the NSA is aware of the reaction citizens have to domestic surveillance, are they aware that the majority want limitations on surveillance? Are they doing anything?
I'm pretty sure they are. I think the main thing that they do to counter this suspicion mainly is kind of to ignore it, because the main reason that the NSA does this is because they know that they are not violating the Constitution, and later on we'll clarify how they are not violating the Constitution. It's a very specific citation.
So even if the majority of the American public wants it limited, we're still not going to do anything because of it. So even though they're aware that the American public doesn't want to have such a harsh program, they're still not going to change it because the Constitution allows it?
I believe they would, mainly because that this suspicion results from libertarians, which you also cite in your paragraphs. Libertarians are known for propaganda, and I don't believe that it's a reasonable statement for them to want to curtail it. You said you had a poll or a survey. How many people were involved?
Go ahead. Okay, so I can't tell you exactly how many people were involved right now, but the important part of that survey is the fact that it was right next to an article that is working for you as to where they shouldn't substantially curtail it, and explain how great domestic surveillance was and how it helps this country. But ironically, the results of the poll identified that the American public completely disagreed with that article, even though they're reading an article
About the article that supported article.
Yeah, they read an article that supported your case, and then the poll said that they actually felt like it should be substantially kept.
Do you feel that that was an accurate representation of the entire population of the U.S.?
I feel it speaks for many, just considering the fact that it was right next to an opposing article. So I feel like that has great significance on this topic, because they're reading something completely opposite of what they actually chose for. Can you explain what metadata is?
Metadata? Off the top of my head, I know that metadata is data that describes other pieces of data. So metadata, in essence, is not the data itself, but rather it describes the specific data. So an example would be email, for instance. Emails can be viewed only by, well, I shouldn't say only by, but emails belong to specific people, but the NSA is only looking at who is like the recipients. Also, phone calls. They only look at people who were involved in phone calls, duration of the phone calls. They're not looking at financial data, they're not looking at personal information.
Hello. Okay. Well, we have to make some important decisions about how to protect ourselves and sustain our leadership in the world while upholding the civil liberties and privacy operations that our ideals and our Constitution require. End quote. This quote by President Barack Obama that the U.S. Justice Department supports the position of curtailing domestic surveillance. Terrorism will always pose a threat to the United States of America and its citizens, but reducing personal privacy, violating civil rights, and eroding the Constitution won't help the fight on terror. This is why, as the Pro Team, we support the curtailing of domestic surveillance. When looking at our opponent's first claim, they talk about how the National Security Agency is substantially aware of the citizens' reaction to the way they surveil and ensures that only people suspected of terrorism are monitored. However, we prove both statements invalid. First, according to a poll conducted on January 1st of last year by the Pew Research Center, quote, 50% of the American public disapproved of the government's collection of telephone and internet data as part of its anti-terrorism efforts. Nearly half of the respondents also said there were not adequate limits on what kind of information could be collected by the government, end quote. It is clear the public has concerns about domestic surveillance and their privacy. Second, the NSA, quote, is collecting communication information from millions of ordinary Americans without either a warrant or any sort of probable cause, end quote. Addressed by state senators of California, Ted Louie and Joel Anderson, it is evident that the NSA isn't just monitoring suspected terrorists, they are also monitoring all Americans. This is a prime example of why we should dramatically curtail domestic surveillance. When examining our opponent's second argument, bulk metadata still stops terrorist attacks, the fact is that it also violates civil liberties and has eroded the Fourth Amendment. The Fourth Amendment, quote, prohibits unreasonable searches and seizures and requires any warrant to be judicially sanctioned and supported by probable cause, end quote. We know from Edward Snowden has released that metadata consists of phone numbers you dialed, who you called, when the calls were made, and the duration of the calls. Not only is the National Security Agency spying on telephone communications, but they also have full reach on internet activity. The program is labeled X-Keyscore and allows the NSA to sweep up emails, social media activity, and browsing history. Glenn Greenwald, American lawyer and journalist, describes in The Guardian how senior officials have testified to Senate Judiciary Committee on the bulk collection. One representation claims the program covers, quote, nearly everything a typical user does on the internet, end quote. Again, all this information is collected from every American without warrants or any evidence for probable cause. It becomes clear that the NSA is intruding on citizens' personal privacy and also breaking the law. In addition, if we don't keep constitutional balance, as Matt Walsh says, this country may evolve into something that is anything but democracy. Matt Walsh is the editor-in-chief of Reason, which has received and have been nominated for many awards for its outstanding content. Our own government here to protect us is hiding things for us for its own benefit. As Matt Walsh states, quote, the secrecy has gone so out of control that the very legal reasoning the government relies on in snooping has been persistently and successfully shielding from public view, end quote. This goes on to say our government is purposely hiding the legal reasoning that the domestic surveillance relies on in order to stay powerful without the American public in the way. Finally, the most unnerving piece of the evidence comes again from Matt Welch, quote, when constitutional balance goes far out of whack, democracy legitimacy is not far behind, end quote. So to say if we don't keep government in check, the democratic nation we know and love may very well evolve into another form of government.
I think it's working. Quote, since September 2001, we have waged an unprecedented campaign against terror at home and abroad, and that campaign has succeeded in protecting the homeland, end quote. This quote was stated by former President George W. Bush. The U.S. has been waging a war on terror for years, ever since the Twin Towers fell to a devastating terrorist plot. Many people that fear the NSA is listening into their phone calls would curtail domestic surveillance. rather than being protected from terrorists that threaten our national security on a daily basis. Keeping the nation safe is exactly what the NSA is working towards, not against. My opponents believe that domestic surveillance goes against the Constitution, specifically the Fourth Amendment, when actually it does not at all. The information obtained through domestic surveillance, such as data associated with phone calls, does not go against any part of the Constitution, because phone records are obtained through the phone companies rather than the NSA monitoring them on their own. It is not a violation. When signing up with a wireless provider, you agree to let the company use your location, web searches, app usage, and other data. This information is stripped from personal information and categorized into an internal database. The Smith v. Maryland case resulted in the decision that the Fourth Amendment does not protect information that is voluntarily given to third parties, including phone companies. Though it is highly argued the NSA is not violating the Constitution, therefore curtailing domestic surveillance could only lead to bigger threats attacking the United States. My opponents believe that the NSA's operations are to be feared and that it can promote paranoia. But they fail to remember that the NSA was, and still is, an organization that stands in order to protect our nation from criminals and terrorists. The operations from the NSA are on the secretive side because if they were not, terrorists would learn ways to go around the system and they would be able to surpass the system. This would cause a downfall and there would be many terrorist attacks and casualties. The point of the NSA is not to induce fear within the citizens. It is to be like a loving mother and make sure that they are protected at all costs. A mother will do anything to protect their child, as will the NSA to protect us. The NSA solely collects metadata. Metadata is information about digital data. Most metadata is associated with public records. When President Obama refers to the metadata in a press conference, he states the intelligence communities are looking at all call records, not the name or the contents. My opponents argue that the NSA's ways for obtaining data should be reestablished by the collecting of only phone numbers and duration of the calls as public records. Numerous companies and sites online also offer disclaimers through terms and conditions. Throughout the terms and conditions, it is mentioned several times that the data used through these sites will be monitored and stored within the company's database. Companies such as Google and Facebook have stated this through their data policies in their terms and conditions. The NSA obtains these records from the companies after the user agrees that their data and information will be stored. Therefore, the acquired metadata is not illegally obtained, and there is no need to reestablish a new way for collecting data. Substantially curtailing domestic surveillance would only cause harm. Without the collection of metadata, criminals and terrorists are more likely to slip through the cracks, bringing a potential threat to the nation. This collection and surveillance is acting within the Constitution and saving lives every day because of it. Without this surveillance, our nation can become vulnerable to online threats and interactions through our technology.
Can we reserve a minute?
50% of the Americans were surveyed. Does that mean 50% out of every single American in the United States, or just 50% out of people that were surveyed?
No, I think you misheard me. I said 50% of Americans, 53% of Americans exactly, disapprove of the government's collection of telephone internet data. And the survey was conducted, it was among 1,504 adults.
So just 53% of them, not everyone.
Yes, 53% of the poll conducted.
Okay.
Well, you said a quote by George W. Bush. What was that again?
So George W. Bush, he stated that we have waged an unprecedented campaign against the terror at home and abroad, and that campaign has succeeded in protecting the homeland.
And wasn't this right after the fear of 9/11? So
Yeah, I believe so.
George W. Bush was a supporter of the Patriot Act, which was an act that was right after 9/11.
Yeah.
I have here that federal court appealed on Thursday, May 7th, a telephone metadata collection program under which the National Security Agency gathers, upload millions of phone records on an ongoing daily basis is illegal under the Patriot Act.
So in section 212 of the Patriot Act, it states that the emergency disclosure of electronic communication to protect life and limb. So section 212 of the U.S. Patriot Act voluntarily disclose the customer communications and records in order for the NSA to know how to search, but they don't really save everything. They strip everything from personal information, and they only look for the certain things that can cause suspicion to terrorist attacks.
Yeah, but Section 215 of the Patriot Act also says that the information is being used to collect phone records are virtually of every person in the United States.
Okay, so what are you asking then?
I'm asking-
What are you saying?
I'm asking if the NSA survey is monitoring all of Americans.
So, well, yes and no. So they're taking information, but they're not like spying on every single person. They're only looking into more deeply into who raises suspicion.
So that's still monitoring.
Tails. Once word got out that the government was collecting data on people in secrecy, there has been a debate on whether or not these operations should continue. We, the pro side of the debate, believe that the federal government should substantially curtail its domestic surveillance. The opposing side of the debate argues domestic surveillance is needed to protect this country, despite how intrusive it is. The Fourth Amendment is part of the Bill of Rights, which prohibits unreasonable searches and requires any warrant to be judicially sanctioned and supported by a probable cause. There is fear that the amendment is slowly being eroded due to the unreasonable searches on online devices, such as the gathering of metadata and the observations of social media. Foreign policy, writes the MSA quote, has been gathering so much information that it is now looking to build an enormous data warehouse, end quote. Our privacy is being taken away by the government with little to no proof of it actually coming into any use and protecting us from major terror acts. Thus, we need to act now to protect ourselves and our privacy. If we don't keep the government in check, more of our rights will be taken away, so much so that our country may not even classify as a democracy anymore. We have to maintain a healthy constitutional balance. Again, as reason states, quote, when the constitutional balance goes so far out of whack, democratic legitimacy is not aligned, end quote. Meaning, if you stray away from our Constitution too much, this could very well end up being something more of a socialist or communist country, as far-fetched as it sounds. The opposing side argues that domestic surveillance in this country is essential to protecting us from terror attacks. They say the NSA takes into account what public says about the program. The thought is that the domestic surveillance in this country is substantially curtailed, our nation will have low national security and be at increased risk of terror attacks, despite the lack of several examples that prove domestic surveillance to be effective. Domestic surveillance in this country has become a large issue in recent years, and the debate of whether or not the surveillance should potentially curtail has become a problem that many, if not most, Americans have an opinion on. What's important is that you have an educated opinion, one that realizes just how intrusive domestic surveillance can be and why it should be substantially curtailed.
Yes. In essence, the choice of whether or not to substantially curtail our domestic surveillance boils down to a matter of opinion. We have given evidence to counter our opponents' claims, such as instances where the collection of metadata have proven effective in preventing terrorist activities. Information gathered is not for unreasonable use by intelligence agencies. That information is used to track many terrorists in our nation or people suspected of such action. The collection of metadata is not unconstitutional, such that our opponents claim. In accordance with Section 212 of the USA Patriot Act, Amendment 1 to Section 2702, Title 18 of the U.S. Code. This amendment states that under company compliance and agreement, there is a legal and voluntary disclosure of customer information and records, which is also stated in the terms and conditions upon user agreement. Also, should we allow the unguided monitoring of terrorists through social media, we are further allowing more and more opportunities for infiltration by these individuals. Terrorists can communicate to anyone, anywhere in the world, technology and curtailing domestic surveillance is an invitation for them to do so. Furthermore, the collection of metadata is not necessarily directed at citizens and actually is effective in preventing terrorism, contrary to our opponent's belief. For instance, of the 227 cases of criminal charges against Al-Qaeda affiliates since 9/11, only one case came from unconstitutional surveillance against a U.S. citizen. Without the aid of the data collection by monitoring his phone calls, the terrorist group could have potentially initiated an attack against our own nation. When we think of domestic surveillance, we tend to generalize it as a mass violation of our civil rights and liberties, and as corrupt information gathering. But what people desperately need to realize is that substantially curtailing our domestic surveillance would essentially harm our nation.
Reserve a minute, please.
We'd also like to use our last minute.
Okay. You keep saying if domestic surveillance is curtailed, then we'll be put in more danger from terrorist attacks.
Face up this way, keep like.
You keep saying if domestic surveillance is curtailed, then this country will be vulnerable to more terrorist attacks. What evidence do you have to back up that that would be the case?
So, one instance I think that we gave was that ISIS is constantly using social media to connect with other terrorist groups and civilians of the U.S. Also, we have a statement by Chief Keith Alexander of the NSA. It states, 50 terrorist attacks were prevented since the activities of 9/11. I think that's essential.
So you say that social media isn't that, like you say the social media accounts, the terrorists use social media accounts, but isn't that just, so aren't they privately owned? So you said that companies hold that information. Do you think companies give that information to intelligence agencies?
Yes.
So
From the terms and conditions when you use websites and things like that, it states that the data will be sent off and used for whenever they need to be used. And through social media, over 180 Americans have attempted to travel to Syria to join these ISIS groups. So through social media sites, they're recruiting more people. So by substantially domestic surveillance, we would be able to track that.
So are these companies also giving out information of every American?
No.
How do you know that?
Well, when you sign the terms and conditions, the information.
What do the terms and conditions actually say?
So for the two examples we use, we have the two from Google and Facebook that kind of represents all social media sites kind of give out the same type of thing. So
Okay, so I have a question about the last classifier. You say that Section 215 of the USA Patriot Act allows collection of metadata unconstitutionally, but I just read Section 215 of the USA Patriot Act, and I didn't see where it stated what you said.
Well, Section 215 of the Patriot Act allows
Do you know what
intelligence
Section
agencies,
215 says?
not verbatim. You have the paper, right?
Yes, I do. So why would you make that accusation?
Because recently, the judicial court just recently passed that on May 7th of this year that the Patriot Act is illegal under, or NSA works illegally under the Patriot Act.
Hello?
The resolution asks to consider whether domestic surveillance should be curtailed or not. We are here to prove to you with the latest data and substantial evidence that domestic surveillance should be curtailed. Our opponents claim if domestic surveillance is curtailed, then it will substantially hurt the country. In reality, the bigger threat to our country is domestic surveillance itself. For instance, the American Civil Liberties Union states, quote, "For all the privacy we have relinquished in the name of preventing terrorism, and for all the national treasure spent on surveillance, we are no safer, quote, end quote. This means that surveillance programs have done little for American safety. One example is the Boston Marathon bombing, where intelligence agencies had information before the attacks occurred, but did not take action. The flaw intelligence agencies have is, despite the massive amounts of information they have, it is difficult to sort through the information that is useful and implement the information. This is why there should be significant changes to domestic surveillance in order to stop incidents like the Boston bombing from happening again. Again, if we don't keep constitutional balance, as Matt Walsh says, this country may evolve into something that is anything but democracy. Our own government here to protect us is hiding things from us for its own benefit. To say, if we don't keep our government in check, the democratic nation we know and love may very well evolve into another form of government. Whether it be socialist, communist, or some other form of dictatorship, as far-fetched as it seems, it may become a reality if we don't keep our government in check and substantially curtail domestic surveillance.
We, as opponents of the resolution, believe this debate has been won due to the lack of reasoning with our opponents. We have given substantial instances to support our claims, such as when the collection of information is not unconstitutional and how metadata prevents terrorism. Our methods of information gathering have protected the people of the U.S. for a substantial amount of time, and our country is not under an immediate threat by our government, if there even is any threat. The collection of metadata is deemed constitutional under Section 212 of U.S. Patriot Act. Because of this, there is no reason to substantially curtail domestic surveillance, as it is abided by the law. Because of this, there is no reason for citizens to fear, but we should be at ease knowing that the NSA is doing their jobs at protecting our nation. Imagine where we would be now if there was no domestic surveillance. There have been more than one mass-scale terrorist attack on U.S. soil since 9/11. Chaos would ensue, and we would all feel unsafe in our own homes. But we have domestic surveillance. The NSA monitors suspicious metadata collected to keep us safe. By not substantially curtailing domestic surveillance, the NSA can keep us safe because terrorists are less likely to slip through the cracks. Without domestic surveillance, terrorists have access to communicate with anyone who has any piece of technology. A child on any piece of technology can be subjected to the persuasions of a terrorist at any given time. Domestic surveillance protects those who use technology from the horrific intentions developed by terrorists. The NSA supplies the knowledge and access to secure the nation. By offering these monitoring systems, terrorist groups can be stopped and their terrorist attacks prevented. By not curtailing domestic surveillance, the NSA can provide the United States with another layer of protection.
Great, so thank you very much for sitting through the first debate. We have a second debate next. If you will please pass your ballots to the end of the rows. We have 4 students who will be collecting those. This is not an intermission. We're just going to quickly switch out for the next group. I believe we have collected the ballots for the first debate. So we'll begin with the second debate. On the pro side will be Valentino Weitzel, and Vanessa Ambrose Mendoza. On con, we have Ms. Ellery Jones and Oscar Galdames.
Judges ready.
When former NSA contractor Edward Snowden revealed the secrets of the NSA or National Security Agency, it made United States citizens question their right to privacy. As Snowden revealed, Americans have very little, if any, privacy online. The NSA uses heavy domestic surveillance and contains the capacity to monitor everything we do online, whether it be on phones, laptops, or any electronic device. The information released in 2013 leads us as Americans to question if the United States should substantially curtail or greatly reduce and extend the use of domestic surveillance or monitoring of citizens within one's own country. The United States should substantially curtail its use of domestic surveillance because 1, this heavy surveillance conducted by the NSA has proven to be illegal. 2, the NSA invades the privacy of United States citizens. And 3, the NSA has proven to be ineffective in several cases and even unnecessary. Our first argument is based on the question of legality of the domestic surveillance programs carried out by the NSA. Jim Acosta, senior White House correspondent, stated that the Court of Appeals has looked at the NSA metadata program and ruled it illegal. He stated that the actions of the NSA exceed the scope of the Patriot Act and exceed the scope of what Congress has authorized. This recent ruling, taking place on May 7, 2015, proves the illegality of the NSA metadata program. One of the greatest reasons the United States should substantially curtail its use of domestic surveillance is its violation of the Constitution. The Fourth Amendment clearly states that the United States citizens have the right to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects. The goal of this amendment is to protect our right to privacy and freedom from unreasonable searches. Our government, in its origin, has set these laws in order to protect our nation's security from within. Our second argument is based off the fact that we Americans have been led to believe that the NSA only spies on people who have ties to known terrorist groups, or have led U.S. officials to believe that a person is conspiring to attack America. While the NSA assures the citizens that this is true when it states in the Patriot Act, quote, the court finds reasonable cause to believe that providing immediate notification of the execution of a warrant may have an adverse result as defined in section 2705, unquote, they still spy on all citizens of the United States. This is evident according to Russell Tice, former NSA analyst when he says, quote, millions of Americans are being spied on. After President Bush's term of office expired, Tice, who worked for the NSA as an analyst for nearly 20 years, said in a two-part interview conducted by MSNBC that NSA had access to all Americans' communications, faxes, phone calls, and their computer communications, regardless of their location or whether they made foreign communications, end quote. The Patriot Act only allows monitoring citizens if there is a reasonable cause to believe that the person is aiming to attack the United States. But why trust our interpretation of the Patriot Act? One interpretation of the Patriot Act leads us to believe that the actions of the NSA, including bulk metadata collection program, is legal. Jim Sensenbrenner, one of the original authors of the Patriot Act, has said this, showing that the actions of the NSA cannot possibly be legal. Our final argument is based on the question of whether or not the NSA's domestic surveillance programs are effective or necessary. While the NSA has been credited to stopping many terrorist attacks, bulk collection of metadata was not a contributor to stopping terrorists. According to David Sturman, Georgetown Center for Security Studies graduate, who has focused on homegrown extremism and maintenance of the United States data sets on terrorism, has said that the actions of the NSA in bulk collection of metadata have had minimal contribution to the apprehension of terrorists who have been in prison since 9/11/2001. Rather, the apprehension of these terrorists can be credited to the CIA and FBI. One of the most famous terrorist attacks that the NSA could have prevented is the bombing of the Boston Marathon. While the terrorists had no connection to any known terrorist group, they did use the internet to learn how to build bombs. Since the NSA is able to monitor what we do online, according to the Washington Post, why couldn't such a radical surge for the bombs and designs that they use cause suspicion for the NSA? This tool that they use is known as X-Keyscore, and it monitors everything we do online, from searches to browsing history. With all this evidence, one can see that the NSA's bulk collection of metadata is illegal, ineffective, and untrustworthy. It affects domestic surveillance are negative in several ways and go against the Constitution and even the Patriot Act.
Quote, efforts and courage are not enough without purpose and direction, end quote. Quoted by John F. Kennedy, puts domestic surveillance into reality. Out of all the information that can be collected, the National Security Agency needs a purpose for all that it does. For now, the purpose is to stop terrorist attacks. In an evolving society, knowledge can be used for good and evil. In the case of domestic surveillance, knowledge can be used to give citizens reassurance and provide citizens privacy. As society evolves, so does the national security behind it. A sense of safety is much of what people strive for, and it is achieved by all the steps taken to prevent future terrorist attacks. With the need for knowledge, a little reassurance is all that is needed to support the ongoing decisions and laws being formed for the safety of American citizens. Privacy goes hand in hand with safety. If you have safety, you most likely have privacy as well. The privacy of a citizen is a major issue to American citizens. Citizens need to know that domestic surveillance is not a threat to personal privacy. For these reasons, we should not curtail domestic surveillance. It is normal to have doubts about intelligence agencies, but if you are the average American, there should be nothing to fear. Alexander W. Joel, a Civil Liberties Protection Officer for the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, says, quote, the information being collected is conducted under the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act Court, which targets communications from foreign intelligence operations and not U.S. citizens, end quote. Obama, in a speech to the Justice Department, has stated that FISA does not target American citizens, which means the intelligence programs pose no threats to Americans. Likewise, data that is being collected domestically or within the United States is only metadata. The metadata program is an operation where the government collects data on phone calls, which consist of phone numbers and lengths of phone calls, not actual phone conversations or names of any persons. This concludes that the government is not listening in on American citizens' personal phone conversations. Also, intelligence agencies only investigate into metadata when it is related to terrorism. Much of what the NSA does can be misinterpreted to the point of hatred. But once people learn the truth about the steps being taken, it will become a lot easier to come to terms with what is being done. In fact, Alexander W. Joel states that there is a, quote, senior official whose job by law is to help ensure that civil liberties and privacy protections are built into intelligence programs, end quote. to then safeguard the steps being taken. With a job so powerful, they must keep in mind not only how the agencies obtain the data, but also the effectiveness of the data then collected. Like Zuckerman, chief editor of the New York Daily News stated, quote, "If you cannot find the needle, you must examine the haystack," end quote. This allows the NSA to follow up on all leads that they may have that cannot be rendered useless. Judge William Hawley of the New York Southern District Court finds that, quote, "The effectiveness of bulk telephony metadata collection cannot be seriously disputed," end quote, due to the potency of the data. Safety is one of the most sought-after feelings of citizens today, and the NSA is a contributing factor to that safety. Section 711 of the United States Patriot Act also helps with this. It is, as the Patriot Act states, quote, "The expansion of regional information sharing systems to facilitate federal, state, and local law enforcement responses related to terrorist attacks," end quote. If it were not for the Patriot Act, terrorists like Nazibullah Zazi with plans of bombing the New York subway system could not be stopped. Today, domestic surveillance has proven to protect national security by giving citizens reassurance and protecting citizens' privacy. With the help of the U.S. Patriot Act, which allows the government access to the tools to stop terrorism, and the NSA, Americans feel safer now than they did 15 years ago. Being a citizen in the United States of America can be taken for granted sometimes, so be grateful with the safety we have and that our government does to protect this country.
We'd like to reserve 30 seconds. Alexander Joel, he's the Civil Liberties Protection Officer in the NSA, right?
Yes, he is.
Okay. Do you know when he became that position and he was given that title?
No, I do not, but it was very recent because he still is in charge of that today.
Well, it was actually December 7th, 2005, and if he was just appointed in December 7th, 2005, why wasn't someone like this who's protecting our civil liberties in the NSA set by, like, from the beginning of when the Patriot Act was established?
The Patriot Act has been around long and it's been in.
Which is my point. Why wasn't someone protecting our civil liberties from the beginning?
Eat it further? Okay. He was on around then, but he was in the program and has grown to be at the higher rank, which has allowed him to advance to that office. Okay, you said that the NSA metadata program has been ruled illegal. What defines being ruled illegal?
Being ruled illegal obviously means something that goes against the Constitution and laws that we have set in the United States, such as the Fourth Amendment.
And is this the only case where it has been ruled illegal?
The only one that I know of right now. All right. So you said something about Nasibullah Zazi, a terrorist that the NSA has stopped.
Yes.
Do you have evidence that directly states that the NSA phone metadata program was a key contributor to the apprehension of him?
He learned that he was being surveilled because he was communicating through the internet, which he then gained the knowledge of and stopped his process because he realized what he was doing was wrong. The source for that is right here.
Well, I actually have evidence that states that the apprehension of him could be credited to the British government and British spies, not the American, if you want to look at that.
And what did the British do to stop him in regards to?
I don't even know exactly off the top of my head, but I do know that he was a known terrorist extremist coming from one of the spots where a lot of terrorists are coming from.
So what is exactly an unreasonable search, and what can be done to protect them against unreasonable searches if it is, as you say, illegal right now?
Well, obviously, to prevent from unreasonable searches is to go for the resolve, which is substantially curtailing the United States' use of domestic surveillance.
And is there a way of stopping unreasonable searches without cutting out the program itself?
Not one that I would know of. I know that the NSA is already monitoring everything we do online, therefore invading our privacy. I'm not sure exactly how they would prevent this other than substantially curtailing the domestic surveillance.
What is classified as spying, as you stated in your document?
Well, spying, I guess in my own terms, could be described as when you're looking into someone's life, into their personal lives, without the person knowing.
If you keep investing in a market that makes you no profit, the United States has been investing in our country's domestic surveillance, and we have yet to see any effective results. The resolution asks whether the United States federal government should substantially curtail domestic surveillance. My opponents argue that we should not reduce domestic surveillance in the United States because domestic surveillance gives citizens reassurance and protects citizens' privacy. However, it is illegal, violates their privacy, and is ineffective. I will not review my opponent's in turn. My opponent's first claim is that domestic surveillance gives United States citizens reassurance. They state that the National Security Agency uses domestic surveillance to stop terrorist attacks in the United States, and it gives us reassurance because we are supposedly safe. However, if the National Security Agency really stopped terrorist attacks, then we wouldn't have experienced the Boston Marathon bombing on April 15, 2013. The Boston Marathon bombing was a terrorist attack that both killed and severely injured people. If the National Security Agency really focused on stopping terrorist attacks, they should have been able to search the metadata they collected to stop this bombing from happening. They should have done something to stop this terrorist attack when they saw the red flags like the $400 purchase of firecrackers and pressure cookers made by the two terrorists in New Hampshire. My opponent's second claim is that domestic surveillance protects U.S. citizens' privacy. My opponents believe domestic surveillance protects United States citizens' privacy because they claim the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act only collects data from other countries, not the United States. In the United States, only metadata is used to collect data, and there is a senior official at the National Security Agency that by law must make sure there are privacy protections built into our intelligence programs. However, in Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, it states anyone who talks to or about a target is subject to surveillance. A declassified 2011 opinion of the FISA court notes that 250 million internet communications were acquired in 2010 under Section 702. Said the Brennan Center for Justice, a non-partisan law and policy institute. My opponents also claim that domestic surveillance is not intrusive. However, this is false. They claim we shouldn't worry about metadata collection. However, metadata provides more personal details than my opponents want to share. Quote, calling patterns can reveal when we are awake and asleep, our religion, our work habits, and our social attitude, the number of friends we have, and even our civil and political affiliations. End quote. Said Mr. Felton, a professor for computer science and public administration at Princeton University. This quote from Mr. Felton is important because he explains how metadata can be used to learn our calling patterns and reveal details of our everyday lives. Lastly, they say domestic surveillance protects U.S. citizens' privacy because the NSA has a senior official making sure that there are privacy protections built into our intelligence programs. However, the earliest form of civil liberties protection was formed under the Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act of 2004. If it was truly an interest of the National Security Agency to not violate our civil rights, it only makes logical sense to have established a way to protect our rights since the National Security Agency has been carrying out domestic surveillance. My opponents argue that domestic surveillance should not be reduced because domestic surveillance is used to reassure U.S. citizens and it protects citizens' privacy. However, we can all see our country's domestic surveillance does not reassure us, and it fails to protect our privacy. It is time for a change in our country's domestic surveillance.
Hello? Can people in the back hear me? Can people hear me? What? Oh, okay, yes. Okay, is the timer ready? Domestic surveillance is a difficult subject to explain, and it's not surprising that many people misunderstand it. It's important to understand that the National Security Agency's domestic surveillance program does not spy on you. They merely gather the remnants of a person's trail. In forensics, there's something called Locard's principle of exchange that deems everything you touch has exchanged something with you and you with it. This applies to electronics far more in the physical world, where everything you do leaves a trail. And what the NSA does with domestic surveillance is they link together those trails. If they see red flags, they will continue looking at that trail. If they see it's a dud, they move on. It's as simple as that. Our opponents claim that program used by the NSA to store all internet usage, called X-Keyscore, is being used on Americans constantly. While it's true that all the internet's data is stored there are two things they forgot to mention. One, it is temporary, at most 30 days, at least 24 hours. And second, there is an unbelievable amount of data going through there. They don't look in there unless they already have a lead through their metadata program. The NSA assured us that it has helped capture over 300 terrorists. Our opponents were eager enough to talk about the program that they forgot to mention that Americans are protected from having their data being looked at unless the NSA has a warrant from the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court. However, as Glenn Greenwald, the very journalist that exposed the NSA surveillance program, explained, quote, NSA analysts are permitted to intercept the communications of such individuals without a warrant if they are in contact with one of the NSA's foreign targets, end quote. Foreign targets, in this sense, would be terrorists and radicals, so they look into a person's record to be safe rather than sorry. Our opponents also claim that the domestic surveillance program is ineffective, yet the results speak for themselves. Just one of the many cases the NSA has released to us is the case of Najibullah Zazi. He planned to bomb the New York subways in a suicide attempt. After he suspected that he was under surveillance, he tried to get rid of the evidence and was arrested on September 19th. Now, the average amount of people that visit the New York subway daily is 5.6 million people. The casualties would have been catastrophic. If he had managed to set off the bombs, he would have injured many lives, well over 100, and that's being optimistic. Our opponents bring up the fact that the Boston Marathon bombers looked up how to build a bomb. However, if one looks up the very same thing, they will get about 86 million results on Google and 52 million results on Bing. Now imagine all the internet traffic going through that. Even if they could have used the X-Keyscore program, which they could not do to them being citizens, there would still be too much traffic. They were not part of a terrorist group and did not show support to raise enough flags, thus making them rather obscure. However, this is not an excuse. As with all things led by humans, domestic surveillance is led by humans, and humans make mistakes. The information was there, yet we did not see it. After seeing the aftermath of the marathon bombing, yes, one would be discouraged. And yes, they would want to shut the program down. However, that should not be the case. A tragedy such as a marathon should remind the men and women of the NSA why they are doing this. Knowing that there was data should strengthen or resolve the system and thus its mission. And their mission is security. They are only doing what has to be done to protect the nation, no more and no less. That's all.
We would like a minute. And we would also like 30 seconds. Thank you.
Testing.
Does this work?
If we cut back on domestic surveillance, what would we have in its place? We need something to protect us against terrorists, and what would it be?
That's a good question. But it isn't necessary to have the National Security Agency here in the United States because we have other intelligence programs such as the FBI and the CIA to help us in that need.
You know that NSA is working with the FBI and CIA to help catch terrorists?
Yes, but how much work does the National Security Agency really do to actually prevent these attacks?
We look at all the records of people and make sure that they are person.
Okay. You said something about 300 terrorist attacks. What was that about?
In the article I read from the Guardian, it said that NSA has assured us there are over 300 terrorists caught.
And what are these 300 terrorist attacks? And do you have evidence to prove that they are caught?
We have our scores.
I'll take that.
In your first speech, you guys mentioned the metadata court ruling that was illegal. However, a more recent ruling overruled that, saying that the metadata collection was allowed to happen until next time.
So what is your question?
Did you know this?
Did I know?
Did you know that yours was an outdated ruling?
Okay, so what was the date of yours?
August 28th,
Of 2015 or what year?
15.
Okay, and can we get that source, please? Thank you. Okay. So you're asking me this about metadata, correct? Or what was the What was your question?
What question did you know about the room that is not real?
Okay, I was not aware of that, but thank you for telling me that. So you said something about the NSA, I believe, or intelligence program gathers the remnants of our information. What did you mean by that?
I meant
Should
that.
that be a concern to the U.S. public?
No, I meant that the metadata program it only targets people, and that is if they raise any flags.
And what are those flags that are raised?
Those flags are raised. They are due to support for terrorist groups.
Could you be more specific about that?
If they show support to terrorist groups like Al Qaeda.
It is clearly evident from all of this evidence that the actions of the NSA involving the concepts of domestic surveillance are ones that must be greatly reduced. The NSA has many times violated our civil rights by invading our privacy, something promised to us since the birth of our nation. In support of this, the domestic surveillance, and more specifically phone metadata program, have been ruled illegal and have gone nonetheless beyond the NSA's specific scope of authority. Along with this, with other government agencies able to protect us from terrorists such as the FBI and CIA, the NSA and surveillance programs are not necessary. Similarly, the NSA uses the tools known as XP Score to monitor everything we do online and includes, but not limited to, search history, browsing history, and email. The opposition would like to believe that the NSA is protecting our right to privacy as Americans. The very purpose of a government is to protect our civil liberties, as is evident from the Declaration of Independence. The opposition has stated that the Civil Liberties Protection Officer for the NSA is protecting our civil rights. However, he has only been attempting to do so since December 7, 2005, when he was appointed this position. If it was truly an interest of the NSA to protect our civil liberties and to do so under the promises given to us since the birth of our nation, then it only makes logical sense to have had a Civil Liberties Protection Officer since the passing of the United States Patriot Act. All in all, we stand in favor of the resolution stating that the United States should substantially curtail its use of domestic surveillance.
As George Orwell once stated, quote, "If you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear," end quote. Unlike our opponents, we know this statement to be true. The National Security Agency is the right direction to head with the future of the United States. The citizens have nothing to fear as long as they are not a threat to the nation. The goal of the NSA is to protect the whole nation and leave no stone unturned. To many concerned Americans, the incident stated earlier provided reassurance of the recently passed U.S. Patriot Act. Furthermore, most Americans say they feel safe the way investigative programs are currently being handled. For example, a national survey on June of 2013 conducted by the Pew Research Center and the Washington Post states a large amount of Americans, 62%, say the federal government investigations on the terrorists is more important than the intrusion of personal privacy. Americans agree it is an acceptable way for tracking terrorists. Overall, both the government and Americans are in agreement that they feel safer with the way domestic surveillance of today is being handled. The technology of today is evolving so rapidly that it forces our domestic surveillance to evolve with it. Cutting back on steps taken to intercept messages and stop plotted terrorist attacks is not worth the possible outcomes then available. As Mortimer Zuckerman stated, even, quote, "as a free society, we are remarkably vulnerable," close quote, due to the restrictions on the data collection and the amount of freedom we are allowed. With the technology available and the ability to provide a sense of security, domestic surveillance should not be curtailed. The mandates in place today are for a purpose of keeping our country safe. Domestic surveillance is like a gun safety mechanism. It is a device that can and will fail. You need to be grateful for the times that it does work and find ways to improve domestic surveillance so we can change will fail to never fail.
Likewise.
You can make a bomb out of pretty much anything. So should the NSA know of everything we buy just to prevent future maybe possible attacks?
Well, what do you mean anything? Can you be more specific? How much stuff exactly can be used to make a bomb? You say basically anything, but
In your instance, firecrackers and pressure cookers, but many household chemicals used for laundry or cleaning can also be used.
yes, but all these items bought together can raise some suspicion, don't you think?
Not if you want to clean business.
So you quoted George Orwell. Who is that? Just curious.
He was just a philosopher that had a great mission statement.
And you quoted him, so I'm assuming you agree with him. And he said, what was his quote?
If you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear.
If that is true, then why does the NSA declassify all of its documents?
If they disclassify all their documents, they will lose the efficiency they have. The NSA relies on secrecy does not mean that it is doing anything bad.
Well, we can say it's the same for us. We want our secrecy. That doesn't mean we're doing anything bad.
But what the NSA does is different. See,
How is it different? It's the people who make rules and laws for us as our government. So why shouldn't they follow the same rules and laws that we follow? I mean, and as stated in the Declaration of Independence, the only reason to have a government is to protect our civil liberties.
it is also to protect our people.
I know, but in the Declaration of Independence, it states that to protect these rights, governments are instituted among men.
As an adult, you do not tell your child everything you know on the topic to protect it. And it's the same way with domestic surveillance. You tell them what is needed, but not what is all that is applied. So then they have enough knowledge on the subject to understand it, but not enough
be overwhelmed.
So you're comparing us, as we the people of the United States, are children, and that the government is our parents. Is that what you're saying? Is that correct?
Yes, they protect us.
They protect us. Well, they're all humans just like us. Why would they be considered our parents?
They have higher qualifications and usage of technology that help give them a higher benefit.
So because they know more, they can tell us what to do, is what you're saying?
Because they are not one person. They are an organization, and they each build upon each other.
And we are a community as a people building up each other as well.
But most people in the community are selfish, and they will choose for themselves.
That's a pretty general statement and a pretty morbid one to say the least. But I believe there still is good in people, right?
There is good in people, but there is also bad. Can you say Section 702 is the way you can say?
We do not currently have Section 702 with us right now.
But in your speech,
The Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, is that what you're saying?
in your speech, you said they could spy on anyone in contact with their foreign targets. Well, foreign targets to the NSA and many people would be terrorists and radicals. So, are you saying any people in contact with terrorists should not be investigated just to be safe? I'm sorry.
Well, what do you mean by this? Like, people who are just in contact with anybody shouldn't spark any suspicion, but obviously, I mean, yeah, I think that maybe we could investigate some people, but
Quote, "This is a truly stunning revelation," end quote, said Elizabeth Goetin, co-director of the Liberty and National Security Program at the Hermiston Center for Justice. In this quote, Elizabeth Goetin speaks about this shocking revelation that our privacy is being violated in the United States. Our privacy being violated is a big issue because all our private information can become open to the public. The resolution asks whether the United States federal government should substantially curtail domestic surveillance. Domestic surveillance in the United States must be largely cut because it is illegal, violates privacy, and is ineffective. Our first point is that domestic surveillance is illegal. Judge Gerard E. Lynch, writing for a three-judge panel of the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, said the metadata program exceeds the scope of what Congress has authorized. In this quote, Judge Gerard E. Lynch states that the metadata is illegal. Our second point is that domestic surveillance violates our privacy. In just 1 week of 2009, research shows that 7% of intelligence for the National Security Agency came from computer hacking and eavesdropping. Lastly, domestic surveillance is ineffective. In 2014, a Washington-based nonprofit analyzed 225 terrorism cases inside the United States since the September 11, 2001 attacks and found that full collection of phone records by the NSA had no discernible impact on preventing acts of terrorism. In this quote, the American Foundation proves that domestic surveillance is ineffective. It is not clear that domestic surveillance in our country must be substantially curtailed because it is illegal, violates our privacy, and is ineffective. As I mentioned earlier, it is now time for a change in our country's domestic surveillance.
You ready? The NSA stands for National Security Agency, and it seems that many people have forgotten that, especially the pro side. They cited their legality of the metadata program on an outdated ruling from the Second Court of Appeals. it okay if I start?
You can start again. But we need to hear you.
Is it working? Is it? How about now? The NSA stands for the National Security Agency, and it seems that many people have forgotten that, especially the pro side. They cite their legality of a metadata program on an outdated ruling from the Second Court of Appeals in New York in May, which was overturned by the U.S. Court of Appeals. According to the U.S. Court of Appeals, there was not enough grounds for which the Second Court made its ruling. Our opponents also brought up the internet program X-Keyscore that records the internet's usage. If they forgot to mention that that for the NSA to spy on U.S. civilians, they would need a warrant from the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court. Or they must be in contact with a foreign target, such as a terrorist or radical. The efficiency that the NSA has does not stop at Najibullah Zazi. No, it has others, and just to mention a few, Waisam El-Fafi and Sabarian Hanshoff, who sent funds to Al-Qaeda, David Heatley, who planned to bomb a Danish newspaper in the U.S., and was responsible for 2008 terrorist attacks in Mumbai, and Khalid Ozani, who planned to bomb the New York Stock Exchange. See, terrorism will never end. The men will be forgotten, but their ideals will remain. And that is why we need something to fight back. Terrorism spreads like a wildfire, and sometimes, to combat a wildfire, you must create a flame of your own. The NSA is that flame, and they work hard so we can remain safe.
Ballots will announce the winners of both debate 1 and debate 2. Again, we would very much like to thank you all for coming to the first ever AP Language and Debate final, and we will shortly have the results of Debate 1 and Debate 2. Thank you also for giving constructive criticism to today's debaters. I'm sure they'll appreciate any feedback that you can provide. We're just about ready to announce the winners. Okay, thank you all very much for waiting, and thank you again to our excellent judges. And I know it's hard to make a decision like this quickly. So, for the first debate, which was between the pro side of Matthew Rada and Frederick Gonzalez and the con team of Taylor Cruz and Caitlin Johnson, the winners of that round are Taylor Cruz and Caitlin Johnson. For debate number 2, between pro side Valentina Weitzel and Vanessa Amber Mendoza, and the con side of Ellery Jones and Oscar Galdames, the winner of that debate is the pro side, Valentina Weitzel. So, if you will come to, thank you all very much for coming. Let's all have some cookies and coffees out in the commons. Thanks again, everyone.